This god flipped Egypt upside down. He overpowered hundreds of deities from the Egyptian pantheon to become the single figure of worship throughout the kingdom. This was Aten, depicted as a solar disk that radiated life and power. He was not merely another god in the throng of the Egyptian pantheon. Aten was central to a revolution that challenged the oldest traditions and threw Egypt into a period of uncertainty and transformation. In charge of this daring turnaround was the Pharaoh Akhenaten, who changed the rules of the game to make Aten the only god deemed worthy of devotion. Today, you will learn the story of how ancient Egypt turned into a monotheistic civilization. Aten's ascension as Egypt's chief deity was not a natural evolution, but a sudden and radical shift, orchestrated by the Pharaoh Akhenaten, initially known as Amenhotep IV. The Egyptians had worshipped a complex pantheon for centuries, where each god carried out a specific role in the cosmic order and in everyday life. The sun god Amun-Ra was one of the principal deities, symbolizing the divine power of kingship and creation. But Akhenaten had a different vision. He saw the sun Aten as the absolute wellspring of all life, a universal god who transcended the confines of Egyptian traditions. Akhenaten not only championed Aten, but practically enforced him as the only deity worthy of worship. A need could have motivated this move to centralize religious power in the hands of the pharaoh, lessening the influence of the powerful priests of Amun, who amassed wealth and influence. Akhenaten believed that Aten was the only true god, the creator of all that exists, and that his light would directly bless the pharaoh and the royal family in a unique and sacred connection. As such, Aten became not only a divine force, but a symbol of centralized and absolute power, revolutionizing religion and defining one of the most fascinating periods in Egyptian history. As opposed to the anthropomorphic figures of the other Egyptian gods, Aten was depicted as a solar disk, beaming light rays, each ending in a small hand. These outstretched hands appeared to touch everything around them, suggesting direct contact with the physical world. This innovative rendering stressed that Aten was a formless deity, but one with an active and all-encompassing presence, reaching out and nurturing all of creation. His representation strengthened the idea of a universal and omnipresent god. Ancient Egyptians saw the sun as a symbol of renewal, power, and creation, a source of energy that nourished life and gave order to the cosmos. As the personification of the solar disk, Aten represented the eternal life and power cycle that nourished existence. He was viewed as a creator deity who could transcend the limitations of the previous gods and oversaw shaping and energizing the world. Aten's sunlight shone on and nurtured all living beings, regardless of their status, race, or origin. This idea of a god who literally touched every single aspect of life with his rays changed the way divine power was understood in Egypt. Aten represented a unifying principle, a universal deity whose essence was found in the very cycle of nature. The Great Hymn to the Aten, one of the most magnificent texts of ancient Egypt, celebrates the special bond between the pharaoh Akhenaten and the god Aten. The hymn emphasizes the importance of the natural world. Plants and animals, rivers and mountains, the seasonal cycle, all are part of the harmony ruled by Aten. This poetic vision of a unifying solar god, blessing and protecting creation, offered a philosophy profoundly connected to the power of the pharaoh, who, as an intermediary, was the only one able to understand and spread this divinity. The Great Hymn to Aten not only praised the deity, but also cemented the pharaoh's exclusive role as the representative of Aten's will on earth. The religious revolution spearheaded by Akhenaten was one of the most radical upheavals in ancient Egyptian history. Egypt was a profoundly polytheistic society, but the pharaoh opted to break with this millennia-old tradition by focusing all worship on Aten. This monotheistic change profoundly altered the Egyptian religious, political, and social structure. Akhenaten's attempt may have been partly motivated to entrench power in his own hands by weakening the powerful priestly class, which controlled immense wealth and exerted enormous influence over the people and the government. By focusing worship on Aten and declaring himself the only mediator between the god and humanity, Akhenaten, in essence, monopolized religious authority. Amun's temples were shut down, the images of other gods were destroyed or eradicated, and the ancient capital of Thebes was abandoned. Akhenaten built a new city in its place, Akhetaten, exclusively dedicated to the cult of Aten. The Egyptians were obliged to adopt the cult of Aten and leave behind the gods they had lived with for generations. This rupture with polytheism affected the whole of Egyptian society, stirring up tensions and resistance between the people and the old religious elite. The idea of a single god was alien to many and difficult to accept. Akhenaten's upturn put Egypt into a spiritually uncertain period, where the old divine order was replaced by a unified vision, but one that depended exclusively on the figure of the pharaoh. But Akhenaten's religious revolution was short-lived. After his death, the exclusive adoration of Aten quickly fell apart, and Egypt reverted to the traditional polytheism that had underpinned it for centuries. This switch back to the old religious system was mainly promoted by Akhenaten's successors, who, seeking to have a more stable government, dismissed the monotheistic reforms and launched a deliberate effort to wipe the cult of Aten from history. Tutankhamun was one of the first to reinstate the cults of the old gods and re-establish the supremacy of the god Amun, forgotten during Akhenaten's reign. Akhenaten's religious reforms had not just estranged the priestly class, but also the Egyptian people, who still had deep ties to the traditional divinities. The restoration of polytheism allowed the old priestly hierarchy to regain its power, especially the powerful clergy of Amun, who were now dedicated to wiping out any trace of Akhenaten's revolution. The temples devoted to Aten were abandoned, and the city of Akhetaten, which had only been built for the worship of the sun god, was gradually dismantled and its materials repurposed for new constructions. The name of Akhenaten was expunged from lists of pharaohs and official records, and monuments to Aten were destroyed or redesigned. This damnatio memoriae process was a way of guaranteeing that Akhenaten's reforms would be forgotten, as if they had never existed, and served to deter new rulers from thinking about taking similar measures, on pain of being erased from history. Only a few hymns and symbolic representations of the solar disk have survived in fragments that managed to evade destruction. With the fall of Aten and the revival of polytheism, Egypt returned to its old religious order, and the monotheistic revolution turned into a brief and almost forgotten chapter in the country's long history. Some scholars consider that this monotheistic attempt had an echo in later religious traditions. The idea of a single, all-encompassing God in charge of creation and maintaining order is like concepts that would later emerge in monotheistic religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Aten's representation as the universal God who upheld all life, with no intermediaries other than the pharaoh, resonates with a vision of a transcendental and omnipresent God, something that would become central to these religions. This event was the first attempt to merge faith under a single universal symbol, and the idea of an absolute God continued to reverberate in religious and philosophical ideologies in the ancient world and in future traditions. While its direct impact was temporary, Akhenaten's attempt to instate a monotheistic religion under the symbol of the god Aten in a polytheistic society made a lasting mark on history, influencing future interpretations of power and faith, and enduring as one of the most convoluted episodes of ancient Egypt.